Mornings, right. They can be a bit of a roller coaster, even when you're not in a classroom full of kids with different needs and energy levels.
You can say that again.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. How can we make those first few minutes in a special needs classroom less about chaos and more about connection and engagement?
Well, luckily for us, there's this recent article that's packed with really practical tips.
And it's not just theory, is it?
Mm,
This is stuff that comes straight from teachers who are out there knee-deep in the morning madness, dealing with everything that comes with a special needs classroom.
exactly. And one of the things the article nails is how tough those transitions can be for some kids. They even use the word dysregulation, right? Like just getting on the bus or knowing that a new day is starting can throw some kids off.
Oh, absolutely. There's that line in the article that talks about students feeling overwhelmed from long travel times or just the general unpredictability of a new day.
And that's why having a really well-structured routine is so essential, I think. It's not about being a control freak. It's about creating this predictable environment where the kids can kind of decompress, regulate themselves, and feel safe.
It's like you're setting the stage for them to learn, right?
Yeah.
Create the right vibe from the get-go.
Precisely. And I think what I appreciate about this article is that it doesn't say, okay, now go and revamp your entire morning.
Yeah, you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
It's more about starting small. Like, what are the little things you can change? Getting the whole staff on board, that's huge. And then, of course, being consistent. You can't just do it once a week.
Consistency is key, right?
Right. Absolutely. And one of the areas they delve into, which I find super interesting, is visuals. We're not talking about just slapping up a calendar, though.
No, that wouldn't be very engaging, would it? They actually suggest things like interactive visual timetables. What exactly does that look like in practice?
So imagine, for kids who really respond well to visuals, you've got this board, and it's got picture cards for different parts of the morning routine. As the kids do each activity, they get to move the card.
So they're like in charge of their own morning in a way. I like that.
Exactly. It makes the whole concept of time, which can be very abstract, much more concrete.
Now, they also mention first-then boards, which I think a lot of teachers are probably familiar with. But how would you explain those to someone who's never used them?
Sure. So these are particularly useful when you've got kids who need those super clear expectations, right? So you might have a picture of something they really like, maybe free time, playtime, whatever, and then a picture of what they need to do beforehand. Putting their backpack away, for example. It's like a visual roadmap.
It's all about giving them the tools to kind of self-manage and understand those sequences.
Exactly. And that actually segues perfectly into the next part of creating this awesome morning routine, which is incorporating movement and really leaning into sensory experiences. And this is where I think the article gets super interesting.
Sensory stuff. I feel like this is where things get really fun and honestly kind of groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know kids love sensory stuff, but for some students, this isn't just about having fun.
Absolutely. It's about being able to function in the classroom. You know, if a kid's feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, they're not going to be learning fractions no matter how amazing your lesson is.
So true. So what are some of the specific strategies this article recommends for creating that sensory-friendly space?
Well, one that I thought was really neat is they call it a tactile wall. Basically, you create a space in your classroom with all kinds of different textures. Think sock fabrics, maybe something bumpy or rough, even natural materials.
Like a sensory playground, but built into the classroom itself.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's not just about being cool, although that's a bonus. It's about providing those sensory experiences that can really help some kids ground themselves and regulate.
Like a reset button for the nervous system.
Exactly.
They also talk a lot about the power of scent, like incorporating a scent of the day into the routine.
Yeah, I loved that part. Smell is such a powerful sense, right? It can change your whole mood. I read about one teacher who started diffusing lavender essential oil in the morning. She had a student who really struggled with anxiety. She said the difference was night and day. Just that little bit of lavender made students so much calmer and more focused.
It makes you realize how much we take those little sensory details for granted.
Right. And the best part is, you don't need a whole aromatherapy kit to make it work.
Okay, now this one really caught my eye. The sound bath. Are we talking like bath time with rubber duckies and whale songs?
Not quite. It's more about creating a calming auditory experience, you know? Think chimes, singing bowls, maybe some nature sounds, playing softly.
Oh, okay, so like a sonic chill-out session.
Exactly.
And I love how these sensory activities can be adapted too, right? Because some kids might need that calming input, but others might need something more active and energizing.
Absolutely. And the article talks about that, suggesting things like a morning movement sequence, or even a texture walk.
Where they're up and moving around and engaging their senses in a different way.
Exactly. It's all about providing those options and recognizing that what works for one student might not work for another.
You know, one of the things that really impressed me about this article is how it goes beyond just the sensory stuff. Like, it shows you how those sensory experiences can actually become springboards for language development and communication.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're already creating this amazing sensory-rich environment. Why not use it to teach those important skills at the same time, right? It all just blends together.
It's like sneaky learning, but in a good way.
Exactly. Sneaky and fun. They had this one example I loved, the musical register. So instead of just calling names for attendance, each kid gets a sound, or like an instrument that represents them.
So it's like their own little theme song. How fun.
Right. And it's not just about being cute. Think about it. You're working on auditory discrimination, turn taking. You could even bring in some early literacy concepts by connecting the sounds to letters later on.
It's amazing how these small changes can have such a big impact.
I know. And then for kids who are a little further along with language, they suggest this morning news show idea.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So basically, the kids get to be the teachers for a few minutes. They can share news about the weather, what's happening in the classroom, whatever.
Building those confidence muscles.
Exactly. And you can adapt it based on their communication level. Some kids might just share a sentence, while others tell a whole story. Or draw a picture, even.
It sounds like there's a lot of room for flexibility with these strategies, which I guess is important because I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, this sounds great in theory, but how do I actually manage all these transitions? Going from a sound bath to a news show seems like a recipe for disaster.
You're right to point that out. Transitions can be tricky, but the article really emphasizes clear cues, like using a transition song, visual timers, even just giving the kids a heads up a few minutes before an activity changes. Okay, 2 more minutes of playtime, then we're going to.
So even though the routine itself is really engaging and kind of non-traditional in a way, you're still building in that predictability.
Yes. And of course, we can't forget that each kid is going to respond differently to these strategies.
Of course.
What works for one might not work for another. And the article talks about that, the importance of observing, being flexible and adapting as you go.
So if a student is totally resistant to the sound bath, for example, you don't have to force it.
Right. That's actually useful information. Maybe they need something else, a quiet corner with some sensory objects, perhaps. Or they need to observe for a bit before joining. It's about creating that safe space where they feel comfortable exploring.
This has been such a great conversation. We've gone from dreading those crazy mornings to like envisioning this whole symphony of sensory experiences and learning opportunities.
And fun. Don't forget the fun.
It's amazing how a few simple changes can make such a difference.
It really is.
So to all our listeners out there, give these strategies a try. See what works for your students. And most importantly, don't be afraid to get creative and make it your own.
Have fun with it.
Until next time.